This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I can't be protected by hopes and prayers.
I won't use hope towards what's next. I'll make my own way.
I know impossible is an opinion.
I won't wait for safer schools. I want to create them.
I don't want to be afraid anymore.
I refuse to be a victim.
I'm just one person.
Determined
To bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
To bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Thank you guys for coming on and doing this interview today. So I'd love to start with just both of you kind of introducing yourselves and explaining your respective role as it relates to campus safety in ZeroNow.
Okay, so I'm Stephanie Keer. I am the Education and Government Solutions Manager at Konica Minolta, and I'm also a professor at NYU adjunct. And my role is as at Konica Minolta and with Campus Security, a subject matter expert for higher education and for K through 12. And so part of that consists of finding solutions and being knowledgeable about solutions that play into campus safety.
Yeah, my name is Sooketoo Bhuta. I'm the Director of Product Management for our Video Security Solutions portfolio. So that really entails the set of solutions and products and capabilities that we have around video security and kind of all aspects of that from a hardware and software perspective. So, and you know, as we look at these solutions as it relates to specific verticals like education, we try to identify the right capabilities and the right kind of packaging of these solutions and products to really address specific needs in different verticals.
So Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing in using data and technology to improve school safety?
Part of the way that we at Konica Minolta are addressing or playing into school safety is understanding really from a technology and a procedural standpoint what a university needs as far as basic building blocks of security, and then working with Sooketoo, who's in our BIC center, to create solutions and technology that addresses those types of pain points for universities and campuses. So, for example, being able to use video surveillance technology and software for things like facial recognition. And I won't go into details, but just on a higher level, Sooketoo can tell you more about that in detail, and the things that schools need to be thinking about from a layered security type of approach for solutions and technology.
Mm-hmm. So Sooketoo, maybe this is a good question for you. What are some concrete examples that schools can use as far as technological solutions that would improve campus safety that maybe they aren't currently using or aren't using at as large of a scale as we hope that they are?
Yeah, certainly. So, you know, like Stephanie mentioned, right, we think about it really from a layered security perspective. So, you know, at a high level, you can look at things to sort of keep the campus secure, right? So, for example, knowing when someone's on campus at a time where they shouldn't be, right? So, like identifying unauthorized access during specific hours, or you know, like Stephanie mentioned with facial recognition, if there's blacklisted people who shouldn't be on campus, making sure that if they are seen, then you know, someone is notified and there's some action taken. And then you know, also other things, right? Like, for example, being able to detect if someone walks into the school carrying a gun, right, or a weapon, and being able to react to that and take specific actions. So those are just a few examples of different things that, you know, we can do from a safety perspective. But again, it's not necessarily a, you know, a sort of all or nothing approach, right? It's different, being able to kind of layer on the specific capabilities that are relevant in a given environment depending on what some of the workflows may be, or just some of the more immediate challenges in a given environment.
So two of the things that you mentioned, identifying unauthorized access and people who are blacklisted who shouldn't be on campus, seems to point to this idea of the importance of a software for visitor management, something that kind of tracks who is walking into the school, and making sure that it's not somebody who's on a sex offenders list or somebody who otherwise should not be on campus or in a school. What is sort of the holdup with implementing visitor management software into school districts, and what work have you guys been doing to try to get the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, and I'll maybe answer it a little bit more from a technology perspective, and I'm sure Stephanie has additional inputs just from a kind of business and school and district perspective. I think a couple of things from a technology perspective. Some of these things rely on cameras or other sensors or devices, right? So there's obviously sometimes a technology hurdle or even implementation hurdle. Sometimes cost-based, but sometimes just the ability to actually get things deployed in the right places. So there's kind of that I think hurdle that you come across. Obviously, budgets and money comes into this, right? Because a lot of these solutions are driven through grants, and so depending on what the priorities of the school are, that may impact what they choose to do. But other things that kind of come into play is also not so much from a technology perspective, but privacy concerns, right? So are there some challenges in certain communities with just general acceptance of video surveillance technologies, and especially AI, right, and how that's used in conjunction with video to detect and identify certain things. So in some cases, there's that barrier as well. And in some cases, it's also just specific to the environment of the school, right? So for example, it's very different, when you're talking about securing a school, say in a large city that tends to be one building with a few fixed entrances versus maybe like a larger high school that has a wide open campus, right? So there's different problems that each of those environments entail in terms of being able to have visibility into those environments, kind of sort of monitoring the perimeter essentially, right? And everything that sort of flows from there. So those are just some of the differences, I think, and challenges that you kind of see in different situations.
And then just from from an overall perspective, and this plays into it depending on, right, it's going to depend on the campus or the school or even the state or local. There's also privacy issues that come with this, right? That could potentially be a deterrent to installing anything that has to do with video cameras, especially in places, right? So you're not going to see these things while you see them outside on the, for the entrances, and it's becoming more and more common. Maybe not so much, in the hallways, right, within the school, and especially not more so in the classroom. Unless there's a real specific need for it. Although some of that on the K through 12 side of things, which is a little bit different, is changing, and it depends, with children with special needs types of issues. So those are things, and I also agree with what Sooketoo said. It's also about really an acceptance, right? So and being able to implement all of those things across a myriad of different areas in a university or a campus setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are very real and important concerns, philosophical concerns when it comes to artificial intelligence. But one thing that I was thinking about is the shift that the Transportation Security Administration had to make in the wake of 9/11 and the onslaught of technology that they brought in with surveillance and checking luggages and stuff like that to improve safety. So I'm wondering if there is a parallel to be drawn there, if we could look at these other organizations and say, hey, what have they done to quell anxieties about these privacy concerns so that we could actually implement this technology in a way that people are okay with?
Yeah, and Michael, good point. There actually is. So the TSA has basically recommended this layer type of solution, and it includes 5 or 6 different points, right? So being able to have, and one of the most important points of that layer for security is some sort of video surveillance type of technology, right? And so this recommendation comes along with basically being able to transfer that, like you said, from industries like transportation into educational settings like the university setting. And so that's probably the biggest layer of security, is use of that intelligent video surveillance technology, coupled with school visitor management software, coupled with access control, coupled with some sort of alert or mass notification system as well. And then finally, or actually the last two, finally the some sort of emergency response plan. So being able to train people or students and professors as well as administration for what happens when there's an actual scenario on campus. So what is the procedure for mass notification, and do you know what to do? Is there this emergency response plan in place? I know NYU, there was a scare, I think it was, I think it was last semester, where we all got text messages, and I actually wasn't familiar with the actual protocol that they were using, where it was, fight, or I can't remember what the name of it was. You could probably...
I think it was run, fight, hide.
Yep. Yeah. So, right. So run, fight, hide.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that was a mass notification that was sent out. And I remember receiving that while we were in class. And so the thing was, though, that making sure that everybody is aware that this emergency response plan is in place, because I think I was a little bit confused that was the plan. And that was also, I think, a lot of the other students that had saw this alert come up on their phone, or however we were notified, it might have been an email as well, we're also a little bit confused. So having an emergency response plan and training everybody on it so that everybody is aware of what that plan is. And then I think the last layer of this is, God forbid, and I'm just going to put it out there, if there is an actual, so in addition to having that type of response plan, but last, potential technology or plan in place, if there's an active shooter situation going on, one of the things that the Alice Institute for Training has suggested is barricading oneself in a classroom. So that would be using a door barrier or some sort of barricading, so that way it would actually deter the active shooter in a situation. If they can't get in easily, that they would move on to the next. And it's been shown that that is actually effective in deterring and saving lives if it comes down to a situation like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that something really important that you mentioned is about the communication. So, Sooketoo, I just wanted to turn to you to see if you had anything else to add about that on the technology front.
Yeah, so just a couple points. So I think one is, in terms of, like you asked about, how do we sort of ease fears about some of this technology, right, and from the public's perception. So I think one thing that we feel, I think is important from a product perspective is just making sure there's transparency, right, around what the product does, how it operates, how the data is being used. I think all of that needs to be very visible and, should be, that information should be made available. Right, so it's not, and I think where some of these, you talked about TSA adoption of all these different technologies after 9/11, right? I think where some of the pushback was around the fact that this was all kind of viewed as a black box, right? Like an image was taken and that you didn't really know what happened to it. You didn't know if that was all being stored in some database or it was deleted or how the data was eventually used, right? And so I think it's important just to have full transparency around what's happening with the data, how long it lives, and how we're guaranteeing privacy, right? So I think that's really an important aspect because, there is a trade-off, right, in that, by deploying more of these surveillance solutions, there is some element of privacy that you could argue is being lost. I think we'd probably all agree that it's, in the greater good to do so, but that doesn't mean necessarily everyone has that same opinion, right? And I think that's where it's important to to make sure there is transparency about the product, how it works, and all of that. I think the other thing, and this is something that we've been implementing as part of our product life cycle, and really how we develop these new capabilities, especially when we talk about AI, right? Because that's always the concern with AI is it's taking all of this data and then doing something with it, right? And then that data can be used in a variety of ways. So one of the things that we're starting to do for all of our AI development is going through what we call a governance process or governance framework that really looks at how is the AI developed, how is it tested, how is it going to be used, right? What are the potential implications if it's misused, and how do we manage that appropriately, and how do we share that information? So this is all part of kind of a new evolving process within Konica Minolta about how we manage any AI that we develop and make sure that it's sort of meets a certain set of criteria before it's released into the marketplace.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Sooketoo, because almost every other day you're hearing about some sort of cybersecurity incident, right? So data's hacked into or stolen, and there's it's up for ransom, and you can't get into it. And so what happens with this data that's out there, right? And being able to make sure that it's secure and protected and confidential, for sure, is incredibly important. Lots of school districts on the K through 12, as well as on the higher education side, have actually paid out ransom monies to be able to get data back if locked down. And it's a real issue. There's a federal law for making sure that all of that student information, especially, is kept really secure.
Yeah, I think what we've touched on here is this idea that physical security and cybersecurity are kind of inextricably entwined. You cannot have physical security, things like, databases and the other things that we've spoken about, without having cybersecurity and without quelling people's anxieties about, well, where is all of this data that's collected by AI going? So what are some communication strategies that you guys have been looking at or working on to sort of make sure these messages are clear and accessible and allow people to sort of say, hey, the trade-off is worth it for my safety, for my child's safety?
So I think a couple things from a communication perspective. Like I said, I mean, we try to be as transparent as possible with what the product does and the flexibility to do different things, right? So for example, when we talk about using a visitor management solution in schools, conceivably it could be used for both adults, parents, as well as children, right? Depending on different use cases. And so, for example, one of the things we wanted to ensure is that we have the ability to essentially mask any data for minors, right? So if you're capturing any face information or other demographic information for a minor, right, anyone, let's say under 18, then there's filters to automatically remove and kind of hide some of that information, so it's not visible, even if the system was to be compromised. So things like that, I think, as we can point to measures that are taken to try to mitigate any harm or any risk, I think is also important to communicate, just so people understand, right? Because at the end of the day, no system is going to be perfect. There's always risk, but I think it's really about making sure we can call out what we've done to mitigate the risk, and at least I think ensure people understand that that some of these things have been thought through.
Yeah, and to tack on to that, with what you just said, Sooketoo, about you can only do so much with the data, it's also really about, and we have a division, our All Covered division, that trains people on how to make sure that you are not susceptible at whatever organization you're at, whether it be a university or a business, to a phishing attack or basically, taking information and sharing it, whatever it might be, with others. So being actually making sure that people are trained. So I think that's also a factor that plays into it. So we can do so much, but it's also really training and making sure that people are aware that they're not sharing information with people that they shouldn't be sharing that with.
So I wanted to Stephanie, I know that you teach data on a graduate level at NYU. So I wanted to sort of take a little bit of a statistical approach here. Obviously, mass shootings, mass casualty events are an absolute tragedy, but they are relative statistical anomalies. So what are some examples of things that are happening on a more regular basis that might not get the same level of media attention, but warrant an equal or a similar level of concern from a safety point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's going to be those things that are happening more on a regular basis where it's more of, an incident of some sort of harassment going on, or it could be something like vandalism on the higher education side. On the K through 12 side, it's a little bit different. The biggest thing on the K through 12, and I know that we're more focused on higher ed here, but is basically sort of kids that are the custody is given to a different parent, right? And so there's this sort of issue with that, and that really happens more often than any of the active shooter incidents. So you're right about that. It's those sensationalistic things that are getting the media attention, but it's those everyday things, acts of vandalism on university campuses. I mean, groping, sexual assault types of things, or other types of inappropriate touching, grabbing, or physical types of robberies, or things that are going on almost regularly, probably in a campus environment.
Yeah, I would say that is also very important to think about. I wanted to circle back to that incident that we had at NYU with the run, hide, fight, because what was so interesting about that was that nobody had heard that catchphrase before. And so when you hear that there is an active shooter situation, I believe it was in downtown Brooklyn at the time that was sent, and you see run, hide, fight, it's like, what does that even mean? Like, fight who? Run where? Like, what is the university actually recommending here? Are they recommending that I go and try to, fight this armed suspect? Like, what is going on? So I think that is an example where transparency around messaging is really important, and maybe an example where that was lacking. So what is something that we could learn from that?
Yeah, I think that there should have been, or what should have happened, because it was, and to see the words that said and the way that they are, until you look it up afterwards, oh, this is an actual paradigm or a model for how you deal with some sort of incident, physical, security incident on campus, is that there should have been better training, really, for everybody. It should have been right smack dab in the on the homepage, or a requirement to actually take this, like the requirements that we have for things like sexual harassment that are required by universities and companies to do on a yearly basis. So compliance, things like that. I think something like that would really help, because then at least you wouldn't know, and the shock effect isn't there, because you stop for a moment and you're like, should I leave the building? Like, what is actually going on with this? Like, and exactly what you said, Michael, what do these words mean? Run, hide, or fight. It's just such a shocking thing. But once you are aware of that as the model or the words of the paradigm for basically becoming alert and what you should be doing in response to this, it would have been not as shocking, or not, as stomach churning, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, stop, drop, and roll, right? Like, that sort of catchphrase that they came up with, but without context, it's just kind of like if somebody is on fire and you just start screaming stop, drop, and roll, that's very confusing without the context in the conversation around that phrase that contextualizes it. And then you say, oh, wow, this actually makes sense. If I just follow these 3 steps, I will actually be safe. So I think that kind of just goes back to how communication and transparency can be really important if it's done properly. I would say, just as some closing thoughts, if Stephanie and Sooketoo, if you could both just kind of provide what you hope the future will look like for education technology, and what you hope schools will take away from these advancements, just what you hope to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully safer campuses, obviously, right? So where there's accountability and there are the correct solutions in place so that these, even the smaller events that we don't hear about on a day-to-day basis, that students can walk around the campus and feel safe and not have to worry about anything but studying and learning, as opposed to, worrying about where the campus is situated. And for colleges and universities, right? They're notoriously, a lot of the times, situated in not so great, or can be in not so great neighborhoods. And so being able to actually feel safe on a campus, and depending, of course, it's going to depend where the campus is and where it's at, and in the surrounding areas, I think is really important for everybody, right? So hopefully trying to be able to use that technology, implement it, and have safer campuses for everybody, the students, the faculty, staff, admin.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the major themes here was just about transparency and trust. And, I think about something like TikTok, right, where millions of people use TikTok, and everybody kind of knows that TikTok has full access to everything on their phone, and they could be using it for potentially nefarious purposes, but nobody really seems to care. So the question is, if people are willing to surrender their data to TikTok, then how can we get them to be a little bit more open-minded to the idea of surrendering some privacy in the name of us all being safer?
I mean, amen to that. That is a really good point.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on and doing this interview. I really appreciate it. I certainly learned a lot, and I think it'll be really helpful and instructive to anybody who listens. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael.